In terms of the panel that we have here, the thinking is that we have 3 different panelists coming with different backgrounds. Of course, we have Laura here from Brazil. We have Rose from AFIDEP, so the African Institute for Development Policy, and my colleague then from the WHO Regional Office for Africa. And we would like to start off with Laura, the director of Veredas, to give some insights when it comes to the 6 different mechanisms and interventions that we heard of Promise when it comes to the experience in Brazil. Brazil really being one of the pioneers when it comes to evidence-informed policy making with the Brazilian Coalition of Evidence, also leading much of the work of the Latin American and Caribbean Evidence Hub, and then Veredas, of course, being one of the key players in that landscape. But so, Laura, over to you for some insights, and also if you can tell us in how far Veredas has actually been using evidence maps to inform policy. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Bonjour e bom dia to our Lusófonos countries who are hearing us today. I am a Portuguese-speaking person, so very happy to speak with you further. So I am a little bit of a rule breaker, and I said to my colleagues yesterday that because I'm from Brazil and I have experienced a big jet lag of 6 hours, I had insomnia one of these nights and was able to read the draft report of this art and science of using evidence. And I was so amazed by the work, and most of all so intrigued because, as Promise mentioned, first the work was the science of using science, and then suddenly the art is there. And I'm very inspired by art. So I will do, I have brought some points I want to speak to you today, but I will do a short story for you because I'm very much about inspiration. So when I was a child, for me, the idea of science was people in lab coats with their glass tubes mixing substance. And my idea of art was anything that made me cry. So I was a child that every time I saw a movie or saw a painting or heard a music, I got really, really emotional. My mother always said I only cried when I was in front of art or really, really angry at something. And the more I think about evidence-informed decision-making, the more I compare it to chemistry, or I write it in my mind as a romance. And this is something I want to share with you today. So we have been talking throughout this event a lot about the importance of relationships. And I think in my experience, relationships always start with some kind of infatuation, some kind of chemistry. It might be a gut feeling, it might be a match, it might be something that someone said that make your belly feel funny, a conversation that produces a spark. In EIDM, for me, often the relationship starts with this kind of seduction almost, where you get understood by someone and you see the spark in their eye and you know somewhere inside that that relationship is going to work. And in our field, we have loads of passionate people. And these people, as you know, can create serious chain reactions just by using their words. And this is quite amazing. So my path in evidence-informed decision-making started actually when I fell in love with a person who was in love with evidence. And his love and his dreams around this made me want to pursue this path, made me want to help him bring his dreams into fruition. But passion alone, as you might know, can ignite movement, but often can sustain change alone. You need more elements to this. So very much like a love story, You need to add some elements to the table to make it work and make it last. You need to build trust. You need to count on each other. You need to recognize limitations. You need to express your insecurities. You need to be very empathetic and generous about the other person's faults, and there will be many. These, for me, are the foundations of a long-lasting love story and a long-lasting evidence-informed decision-making story. The art and science of using evidence, for where my poet heart stands, lays on filling gaps with connection, allowing yourself to dream together, even if it means failing many, many, many times before the dream comes to fruition, and most of all, means being there for each other. It means also suppressing this infatuation stage. And this is very hard because the infatuation is so marvelous, but surpassing it to make it actually love and putting the work into being really responsible to one another is really important. I don't know if we have any funders here, but my message to funders, it also requires us to surpass our own infatuations and the ideas we create, and that often seem bright at the first year and then 2 or 3 years later don't seem so bright anymore. No one wants to put their true self, their feelings, their energy into 1-year projects, 2-year projects. We are here for the long run. Allow us to do this in a meaningful way. We are responsible for every door we open and every door we close. And there is a loving way to do both. There is an exercise in patience, in waiting for a door to be open. And this is so much true for evidence-informed decision-making. You might have in your backpack the best available evidence, incredible, marvelous. If the door is not open, you won't be able to open unless you wait for the right timing for your backpack to fit in that place. So I was very inspired by the 6 mechanisms in which this map is organized. The first of them is awareness. And we always talk about building awareness. But in my experience, awareness is not something you build on other people. It's something we make people feel. We start awareness when people feel that that matters, when people understand that evidence has a potential to change their lives or change other people's lives. Awareness is the first flame of desire for change, and it can be very scary. Often we build awareness, and when we understand the effort it takes for the awareness to begin become reality, we are scared about the amount of effort that is needed. Mutual understanding, there is another mechanism there, depends on treating divergences with generosity, being flexible, and not carrying grudges. This is very hard, because often when we are dealing with people who have power imbalances, violent relationships are established. And we tend to hold grudges, at least I tend a lot. I am a Scorpio. Providing access, that is another mechanism of our map, means taking the time to get to know what are the preferred ways to connect with an information. Means transforming this information in something that ignites action. Means accepting the types of information people tell you they need, and not the types of information that you want them to want. Interacting is even trickier. So this is a mechanism that we'll have a lot of information about in the map, thank God. But in real life, it's really, really tricky, because can we truly interact when we are unequal in power? Can we promote safe environments so people can come as they are? Or is everything always a performance? Interaction often relies on building a sense of community, being transparent or on roles, on who brings what to the table, on sharing without a sense of ownership. Sharing. The fifth mechanism is skills. And to develop skills, you need to understand where do you want to get in the first place. You have to be able to speak about your limitations, your comfort zones, your fears. Hard skills are so much easier to develop than soft skills. And finally, structure. And isn't that what we aim often in relationships? Means always returning to the foundation and making it always, always stronger. Supporting processes of learning, of failing, of fighting, of connecting, of loving, and caring without the fear of crumbling down. It's very hard to support the process of caring for people. When we go to a community, I was speaking with Professor Sandy Oliver about this. In Brazil, we work with people who are formerly incarcerated and their families. If I have 1 year project with them, they are connected with me for life. They are always a reference for me. I always care about them, and they will always care and remember about me. So how can I make this care into a long-lasting relationships, not dependent of projects? Well, as you've seen, I am a Brazilian, and I am a Latin American woman, and I am a Portuguese speaker. I am also, by African standards, a young woman, which I love, because in Brazil I'm not young anymore. And I have so many privileges, one of them being here, one of the only people in Latin America and the Caribbean here today with, among some fellows. But I also have a great fear of being misunderstood. For most of my life, I mimicked typical male behavior to receive affirmation in my communities. It took me many years to allow myself room to care deeply and communicate through this feeling. The most beautiful artists and the most creative scientists, and I would dare say the most engaged policymakers also, they share one characteristic. They want to be heard. They want to be able to speak in the best way they can and be truly heard. Let us train our ears to hear one another without preconceptions and without judgment. This is so important. We are always giving validity and certainty to what other people are telling based on the way they are telling their experience. This goes a long way, not hearing with judgment. The art and science of using evidence for me is the mirror of the human experience of turning passion into love. All of its pitfalls and all of its wonders. Finally, I want just to invite everyone to take a moment here and appreciate being here together in this beautiful, beautiful lakeside, learning to one another. We have so much privilege in our hands right now. How we will share this dreamlike experience with our peers? Can we look back to our path so far and identify who or what made us fall in love with evidence use? Does that initial spark still move us today? And can we finally, please, recognize the power of dedicating time to help someone make their dream come true? This map produced all of these thoughts and emotions in me. And I hope when it's launched, you can dive into it and find your own meanings.
Thanks so much, Laura. I mean, that really deserved a big round of applause for this love story that you shared with us, and taking the art of using evidence really literally and transforming your intervention into this poetic expression. So thank you so much for that. And I think if we exactly do what you've just asked us to do, go back into what made us fall in love with evidence-informed policy and practice, we do know it. I mean, I mentioned it on the first day, what was my trigger at the time, and it's something that carries us, I think, really throughout our professional and personal life. Also, thank you so much for, again, emphasizing the theme that I've heard so much throughout the last 2 days, which is building on relationships, building on caring, making sure that we build these trusted interactions that are so essential as a fundament for then more scientific interactions to happen in the end. But without that true fundament, it will likely fail. So thank you for emphasizing that, Laura. With that, let us move over to our next panelist, to Rose, and for Rose to give us some insights of the experience of AFIDEP, again, thinking about the 6 interventions, the mechanisms of the evidence map, how your countries and the experience that you have had were able to cater for those mechanisms, while secondly, also some reflection on the evidence map and how far in your experience evidence maps can really change policymakers' thinking, or maybe even beyond that, interventions, behaviors, policies. So Rose, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that it's hard to speak when Laura has spoken. Had we rehearsed this yesterday, we would have agreed that she speaks last. She did a very good rap and appeal, and just getting all of us to think maybe it's actually the art, because what she's talked about is really the heart and the art of evidence use in decision making. It's really, really nice. I was like, I wish I could be able to express myself that way. But the problem is I can't even remember when I first fell in love with evidence. Kind of feel like I've always been in love with evidence. I don't remember the beginning. But thank you so much, Promise and the team, for this massive work. This is a lot of work that has gone into this. And thank you so much for producing this tool that I think is extremely useful in helping us understand the field. Just looking at the 6 mechanisms. But even before we get to that, looking at where the evidence is coming from. You know, I am proudly African, you know, and I wanted to see that map with a lot of evidence from Africa, because there's so much going on here, right? There's so much innovation on the continent. And so I think for me, what was going through my mind is that we need to do more as people who practice in the space of EIDM, to document our experiences, importantly, even measure them and measure them robustly for us to get lessons that we continue contributing to building the field of EIDM globally, but just being able to see what's going on the continent. I was feeling bad seeing that much of the literature is actually not from the continent. And I think before I also come to the mechanisms that I'll speak to a bit, reflecting on my experiences, what also struck me was the fact that there isn't much evidence on development outcomes. And so we do a lot of things, but we're not able to say these lots of things that we have done have actually gotten more kids in school. You know, they have gotten reduced maternal deaths, you know, in the health sector. And that's not our challenge. For me, I was reflecting back and saying, it's a lot of things, isn't it? We know that we are working in a space where that impact takes time. It takes time for you to get to a point where you can see reduction in maternal deaths. You can see more kids in school. So it doesn't take you 2 or 3 years. Many of our interventions, particularly those who work in the NGO space, and your work is driven by grants, much of that will be 2 years, 3 years. And so by the time you're done, the difference that is going to come into development goals is going to come way after your intervention has ended. You know, and so you're not able to go back to say, okay, 5 years later, can we look at how my intervention has contributed to changes in development? Much of that time, particularly people in the space where I sit, often you have also moved on to other grants, you know, and so you don't have even the funds to go back and say, can we assess, you know, the impact of this work we did in 2013 to 2015? Can we now in 2023 assess how it has impacted development? It's also hard, you know, to assess that, because there's a lot of things interacting to produce development change. But as Laura said, we are in for the longer term, and we are hoping that we are able to think of our interventions and funding in more of the longer term than the 2-3 year space. Yeah, I don't get discouraged because we don't have evidence that shows that we have improved lives. I think that development is a process, right? It's a process, and a lot of things are in that mix contributing to changing lives, and evidence is really one of the big ones. Going back to the mechanisms and reflecting a bit more on the work that I've been involved in at AFIDEP, working in various countries across the region, but very intense work in Kenya, where I'm based, very intense work in Malawi, a bit of work, of course, in Uganda with our partners at ECAS. And so I'll be drawing a bit from this context where I've done a lot of work on the ground. When I think of awareness, which is the first mechanism, it's really about valuing evidence. And it links very much to what Laura said. So valuing evidence is, in that sense, it's not tangible, right? You have to see it in the things people are doing. So if our government values evidence, you have to see it in the investments they're making, in how they're strengthening their knowledge structures. Because formally, you see a lot of government documents, even in Kenya, saying that policies will be made based on evidence. So formally, there is that commitment. They know evidence is critical. They will say they value it. But then in practice, you see a totally different story. And that's when you look at how much money are we putting into research? You know, how much money are we putting into translating that evidence for decision making? And that's where value is. So sometimes value can become hard to measure, but I also know we do a lot of things around value that we don't measure. And that's, I think, how it doesn't get into publications, because we kind of take it for granted a lot. But also it becomes something that is even harder to measure. But value is so critical. For me, it's like the foundation, isn't it? So if you're looking at a building, value is underpinning everything else. Because if they value evidence, they will invest in providing the evidence needed. They will invest in generating the evidence they need. They will put in the money. They will put in the capacities they need. They will provide the platforms for these interactions. And so value becomes critical. And it's something that I think all your evidence shows something we need to document more. You know, how do governments transition to a place where they really value and invest in evidence structures? But when I talk about value, it makes me want to go to 6. Because 6, so for me, value and 6, which is about structures and processes, are like often the elephants in the room. And often we don't like to talk so much about the elephant in the room, isn't it? Because there's so much work to do there. There's so much work for you to do to have a very strong value for evidence, so that evidence, you know, has to compete with everything else. But even in that competition, if there's value for evidence, you see evidence competing much better than everything else. But then structures, it's really good to see that there's so much literature, but it seems to me that there's a place where we need to learn more. And so challenging all of us to look at those publications looking at structures. What can we learn? Because if we could address structures or have more interventions there, document, learn, and also do more about value, we would be able to contribute better to the other 3 mechanisms in the middle. And so a lot more understanding of changes, what structures are needed, but also how does that happen over time, and what are the enablers and what are the barriers, you know, to providing the structures and environments that enable an evidence-use culture. There's, of course, politics there. Somehow I never finished talking about evidence, just talking about politics. But there's obviously politics in value. There's obviously politics in the structures. I'm not saying there's no politics in access, in interactions, and in skills. There is politics there, but when you come to value and structures, you see a lot more politics because of the things you want people to do to demonstrate that evidence is valuable, you know. And we know that a lot of us often don't want to engage with the politics because it's harder to engage with the politics, right? And so it could be the reason, you know, partly why we have much less literature in value and in number 6, which is looking at structures, because we are not really engaging those spaces very well and very critically. One of the things that I keep reflecting on is that sometimes some of us look at politics as something that happens somewhere, but we are all in politics. We are all sitting here because we are hoping to improve people's lives, right? If you're doing something to improve people's lives, you're already in politics. And so if we can engage with it a bit more, we would be able to drive some progress in value and in processes, which for me are really big underpinning factors for an evidence-use culture. Coming back to 2, 3, and 4, I was looking at the literature there and saying those are sometimes the easier things to do, isn't it? And we all like to do easier things, right? Skills development, enhancing access to evidence, having agreement, you know, developing priorities. We've been involved at AFIDEP in process to support government like Ministry of Health to develop their agenda, the priorities for health. Those become a bit easier things to do because they're very tangible, and they also involve like the ministries often will see the value for those, you know. And so they're not things often you're convincing people to do. They really see the value and want to do it. The challenge, though, as I talk about priorities, which is the mechanism number 2, is that priorities also keep changing. And so we've been involved in a long process of working with the Ministry of Health a couple of years ago to develop priorities for research for health. It took nearly 5 years, to get those priorities done. By the time they were done and published, they were obsolete. And so we've stepped back with the Department of Research to say, were they useful? Actually, the division has said they will never do them again. They're just like, let's engage our departments every year, and we generate priorities every year. Let's not get into a scientific process of producing priorities, because it's very political. Sometimes it took a very long time, and by the time they were being launched, they were obsolete. You know, because you're launching priorities identified in 2016, you're launching them in 2021. They're no longer priorities for anyone. And COVID had just happened, you know. And so us being very clear on that and the political process for setting priorities is important, but maybe being more dynamic and saying, can the ministries or departments every year just tell us what their priorities are, rather than us going through a scientific process. At AFIDEP, we've done a lot of work on access, enhancing access, particularly developing capacities to synthesize, translate evidence. Also, of course, that also touches on skills, you know, for evidence use. And it also touches on interactions, quite a lot of work on interactions. When I saw so much literature there, I wasn't surprised, because that's where a lot of us work. And that's why we've done so much. It's also easy to measure. When you think of measuring what you've done on enabling access, it's easy to measure. About skills development, it's easy to measure. And also about interactions. And so it could be the reason why there's so much literature as well, because there have been interventions that are very clear, it's easy to measure them, whereas some of these interventions, particularly on value and structures, are not easy to measure, and often we don't document them and measure them very well. And I think I'll finish with that point around measuring what we are doing and what we are learning. It does seem like it's one of the weaker areas. You know, just even having a clear monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan for EIDM interventions, which means a very weak area. I've looked quite a bit at the literature around training and mentorship for EIP, or knowledge translation, and you find that the way we are measuring what we are doing and what the training is achieving is quite, sometimes the measurements are not very robust. The whole process is not very robust, you know. And understandably, you know, because capacity is also complex. It comes with hard skills, but also soft skills in terms of motivation and why I want to do this. But just challenging us to be a bit more robust so that we are getting lessons that, you know, others can learn and we can contribute to building the field. Sorry, I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, that was excellent, Rose. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your intervention and really providing some real-life experience into the implementation of those 6 mechanisms, drawing on values, drawing on politics, which is, again, as you were saying, also the elephant in the room. But I found in particular very interesting, not only the aspect of measurement, and that usually those aspects that are more easily measurable are measured, but also the structural barrier that you outlined, that if projects are just funded in the short term, then of course you will not look as an implementer into the measurement in the longer term, which is the impact that we are so much missing in the map. So thank you so much, Rose. Last but not least, Joseph, my colleague from the WHO Regional Office for Africa. Over to you for some insights, and maybe you can also draw upon this really interesting resolution and framework that was adopted in 2021 by all member states of this region when it comes to strengthening the use of evidence, information, and research in decision making. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you very much. Usually I feel blessed being amongst women. You know, as it is said, blessed are thou amongst women. So I'm blessed amongst women. These are two very powerful women that after they have spoken, I don't know what I'm going to say, you know, because it looks like they've taken all the words from my mouth. I cannot retract and repeat, you know. But I would like Tanja said, she has structured me to focus strictly on what we are doing in the regional office as an organization, WHO. And I really want to congratulate Promise Nduku for this excellent work. Coming to this meeting is an eye-opener. I've seen lots of skills. I've seen lots of products in this area that we have been asking questions and thinking of what to do about them. as an organization. As an organization, we work with member states, we support member states, and we collaborate definitely with non-state actors as well to be able to support member states. But our primary goal here is to improve health outcomes in the different countries we serve. In our own case, we have 47 countries that we are serving. So our focus is how to improve, our question is how to improve health outcomes. And in trying to grapple with that question, we believe that there is need for a combination of knowledge that is both generated and harnessed as key for informing policies that will lead to improvement of health outcomes. So generally, WHO had, in recognizing the role of evidence in improving health outcomes, had launched the concept of EVIPNet, Evidence Informed Policy Network. And countries were encouraged to establish EVIPNets, as a state arm of generation of evidence, working in coalition with non-state actors. So I'm not going. I may refer to some of the mechanisms, but not in detail because my colleagues have treated them in detail, operationalized them. But I will just make some passing references to them. So, but then, despite this realization of the importance of EVIPNet, which is the realization has to do with the level of awareness in your mechanisms, your list of mechanisms, we have very few member states that have established EVIPNets or institutionalized EVIPNets to operate and generate evidence to inform policies. Just as it is generally with implementers, I'm not trying to throw blames now. There is this tendency when you say, talk about implementation research. You'd say it is necessary to conduct implementation research to understand what we are doing and how we are delivering services. But implementers think that that research is a waste of time. So they just want to run off and begin to deliver their interventions. But we keep pressing that there is need for evidence to drive whatever we do. So in 2021, as Tanja mentioned, member states, that is a composition of ministers of health from all the 47 countries in the African region, came together and adopted a resolution which is to establish or to strengthen knowledge translation platforms such as EVIPNet in all the member states in order to optimize the use of research and research production and utilization of results from research for evidence-based decision to improve the health of the populations. So this is what the resolution that was adopted in 2021. And we had a number of interventions that are lined out to realize this resolution in the member states, to ensure that the EVIPNet is established in all the member states, and to ensure that policymakers begin to use good evidence to drive policies. We saw during COVID-19, when COVID arrived and nobody really knew so much about what COVID is all about, it became obvious that we needed knowledge, we needed evidence to be able to respond to COVID-19, and people were all grappling in the dark. However, I'm encouraged with your findings that when you did, in terms of subject area, you found that health is topmost. But again, I'm not surprised because health as a development issue is a multidimensional issue. So you may also have had topics from those other areas coming into the aspect of health. But in the African region, we think we are very laid back in this, and we are struggling to realize this resolution. So, however, today we find with NITAGs are National Immunization Technical Advisory Groups. NITAG has now adopted evidence as, do I call it a culture or as a practice, in advising governments on how to go with respect to immunization. This came up during COVID-19 vaccination. How do we go? What policies do you adopt for immunization? And so NITAG have been capacitated. They've been trained to use evidence in providing advice to government. So this has to do with the element of providing access as a mechanism from the 6 mechanisms you listed. But this is just one entity, NITAG. We have other areas of where you have advisory groups, advising government in different aspects of life, in different aspects of health. Have they started adopting this, despite the awareness of the importance of evidence? So we still have a lot of work to do, and that is where we come to the issue of developing skills, capacity building. And we also talk about mutual understanding. Because sometimes when you generate this evidence and the policymakers themselves don't really understand how this evidence come about, are they going to use the evidence you generate? So we have to create an atmosphere of mutual understanding, such that policymakers and the generators of evidence both understand where they are going to and what they are doing. One practical problem we have in the African region, talking from research, for instance, we find that oftentimes the research we do are researches that are designed to answer questions of the donors. And most times, these donors come with their research agenda that is not linked to our needs in the African region. They are not answering our domestic questions. They are answering questions that are external to us, and they collect the information and they go. And the policymakers get this evidence from these researches, but it does not answer the local questions that we need. So we need to engage the policymakers and generate an atmosphere of mutual understanding for them to be able to use this evidence. But then they also need to understand the processes of generating this, and that's why I talk of capacity building. That's why we need skills development. And like Rose said, if we have good awareness, we have good understanding, and we have the skills, then these other aspects may just fall in. Of course, structure, which is the political part of it. These other aspects may just follow, and we'll be able to achieve what we want to achieve in making good use of evidence for policy formulation. So I just want to stop there because my colleagues have talked a lot about these mechanisms, and I don't want to repeat everything. But again, to congratulate you for the good work you've done. We are looking forward to it. I have the draft copy, but we are looking forward to when you launch it formally, such that we can now begin to use it officially without fear. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joseph. And I think I haven't promised too much earlier on in saying that this is a very inspiring panel. We had a very succinct presentation from Promise, and the last story from Laura, a very passionate intervention from Rose, and then hearing from Joseph about the major agenda that we have at the WHO Regional Office for Africa in making every country, every member state have a knowledge translation platform in the area of health available within a short period of time, in fact, for the extension or the duration of the framework and resolution. We're running a little bit out of time. I think we would maybe have time for 1 or 2 questions, but for me, at this point, just to also make a call for action in this room, because there are two areas that we would like to emphasize, as we had discussed as a panel yesterday. In fact, one is once the map is out, please look at it and make use of it. It's really there for you. That's one thing. But secondly, as you've heard, we are having areas of gaps when it comes to evidence. We are looking at WHO into developing a global agenda, a global research agenda for the filling of those gaps. But that also means that in the meantime, it would be fantastic if more people were interested in publishing their findings. We also included, as you have heard, into this map, the grey literature. So whatever is being published can then feed into this map but we cannot, of course, get hold of anything that sits in a drawer. So please publish your work. With that, could I have a quick sounding out whether there are any questions in this room or whether we would go online? Howard?
Thanks very much, Promise, for a very interesting presentation. One point, so you mentioned, well, you mentioned 3IE, but actually you use EpiMapper to make the map, and I think it's EpiMapper. So we presented the map, you presented the map, no one talked about how you make the map. I think we want more people to do maps, so there's a free software available from the Epicenter called EpiMapper. We generally use in Camel Collaboration, and you use. Oh, sorry. So put his laugh, whistling. So just to mention EpiMapper, one of the neat things about EpiMapper is you can actually, anything you code, you can make a row or column heading. So we often have alternative presentation maps we do, and particularly one where we show the regions as the column headings, and then keep the same rows, and that shows the disparities between regions and evidence if it's the case. And in this case, a lot of African evidence, so that's good. My question is, when we do maps, they're usually instrumental products. They're not an end in themselves. So we use them to build the evidence architecture and evidence-based decision-making products. But there can be alternative uses like filling the gaps with more research and so on. So I'd be interested to hear what your plans are for the use of the map. And one thing I would like to see is a typology of the different interventions used to try and promote knowledge translation and knowledge use.
Hello? Working. Thank you so much, Howard, for commentary and your question. How do we, the key one is how do we plan to basically use the map? Yeah, I think internally from our side, the idea is that we do a more in-depth investigation and do synthesis. I think we'll start with two key priority mechanisms. First one is access and then structures and processes. So just do a synthesis on them and try and see how effective they've been. As you are aware, evidence maps are used to support systematic reviews and synthesis. So that's like the plan, and then sort of develop guidelines around these specific areas. So we'll prioritize two and then move on to the other one in simple terms. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe if I can add to that. So that, of course, different instrumental users of the map. One, which we're hoping that it's useful for you and other members of the evidence to policy and practice community. For us specifically, as Promise was saying, is using the map to then further develop systematic reviews in that field. That's one thing, but then secondly, also, I quickly alluded to it, one of the key mandates of WHO is to develop global research agendas. And not only global, we hope that this is also then triggering down to the regional level and hopefully also at country level. So we would like to use this map to inform the development of a global research agenda, which would be the first one that WHO develops in the field of knowledge translation of evidence to policy and practice. And we have a concept note for that. The mechanisms are ongoing right now, have been initiated. So that would definitely be a key instrumental use of that map as well. Good, so maybe we can ask colleagues whether there's anyone online available, or do we have a second question here in the room, in fact? No? Is there anyone online? I mean, we already have overstepped time anyway, so ideally, unless there's anything burning, crucial, no. Okay, so let me thank the panelists again and also this audience for having been here this morning. Thank you so much for your attention, and again, watch the space for the launch of the full map and let us know how you use it, whether you see any room for improvement. It's really there for you, so we'd love to make it as user-friendly as possible. Thank you so much.